Before we begin to look at our own anxiety, we're going to look at what performance anxiety is like for a number of other performers. And we're going to use this document to do so. This document has 6 pieces of information that we're going to observe in others. The first is activating event. Can we determine what it is that's activating this performer to be so nervous? The second point is somatic response. So this means what response the person is feeling inside their own body. Lots of common somatic responses to anxiety are a change in breathing, a change of heart rate, sweaty palms, a dry mouth, feeling numb in their hands and their feet. There are many responses and we'll look at them all later, but for now we're just going to listen and hear what it is that other performers say. I also want you to notice if the performer reveals any thinking or beliefs that they had about their anxiety. What was it that they were saying to themselves in that moment of performance anxiety? The next thing is our feeling and emotional place. So do these performers name particular feelings in that moment of a high level of anxiety? And finally, what is it that they did? Do they talk about any particular behaviors or physical actions that another person could have observed that they did in the anxiety? I've also put another little point there, which is advice. Because when performers have mastered their performance anxiety, they'll often give advice on how others can do the same. And also in moments of profound anxiety, when you're trying to help another performer, you're trying to help yourself, often people give certain bits of advice. You'll be okay once you get on stage. Just breathe. And I want us just to observe what these are, because often they form the common myths around how we get better or over our own performance anxiety. But in actual fact, they can be ineffectual. One of the easiest ways to get a broad idea of how performers are experiencing their performance anxiety is to use YouTube. You can search for performers and anxiety and stage fright, and you can watch interviews with people talking about the experiences that they have around their nerves in regard to performing. For example, Nicole Kidman is interviewed on the Graham Norton show. She's come to London to do a play, and they're talking about the anxiety that she felt having to step up on stage in front of people. We can guess that the activating event was something to do with performing live in London. She talks about the somatic response being surging adrenaline, pounding heart, really feeling her heart beating in her chest. She has thoughts that are around, how do I get on stage? Why am I doing this? She feels terrified and she feels fear. She doesn't talk much about any behavioural response she has, but she does say that the advice that she got was, once you're on stage, it'll go away. And she says that luckily for her, it did. Graham Norton, the interviewer, also gives his own version of advice by indicating that one of the ways he copes with his anxiety is to drink some alcohol. Not recommended for performers needing to step on stage, particularly dancers. The singer Adele suffers from stage fright. What seems to activate her is size of venue. So the larger the venue, the more she suffers. She much prefers intimate theatre and smaller venues. Her somatic response, or one of them that she talks about, is projectile vomiting before she goes on stage. For many of us, we will know that digestive feeling of feeling queasy and nauseous, but she's actually sick. She doesn't talk much about the thinking that she has during her anxiety, but she does talk about feeling frightened. She talks about just being really frightened. And some of her behavioural responses are that she tries to leave the venue, she tries to escape the venue. And she doesn't talk about the advice that she gets, although many reports that you may read online talk about how she has ongoing support with her performance anxiety. In a show called America Undercover Panic, Kim Basinger talks about a panic attack that she has. This is where the activating event was unclear for her. She says it just came out of nowhere all of a sudden. The responses she has were that everything went silent. There was a droning kind of noise. She realized that her hands were shaking and her palms were sweaty. Her knees were weak and she could hardly move, and she was finding it difficult to swallow. What's interesting about this interview with her is that she talks about making it to her car and driving home through the back streets. And this is a way of playing it safe. So often the anxiety that we can feel as performers means that we stop just going for things. Instead, we really pull back and play safe. She then, when she arrived home, didn't leave her home for 6 months. And again, this is something that profound anxiety responses can have on us, is that they can really shut us down and lock us in and stop us from pursuing our dreams. The actor Jonathan Pryce is interviewed on a program called Think Big. He talks about his activating event being when he had to play himself, when he had to get up and talk in front of people as himself. When he was playing a character, he experienced a lot less anxiety. And when he was activated, when he did have to play himself, he felt faint and dizzy, his hands started tingling, and he had trouble learning his lines. His thinking was that he was dying inside. He talks about advice being that you have to see that what you're doing is more for another person than for yourself. And this has been his way of managing his anxiety. If we move into the dance world now, you can look at a small excerpt from Dance Mums where Kendall has what they call a panic attack, but we're observing a moment of anxiety in front of the camera. The activating event is a moment where she's struggling to be the number 2. So not the best one, but she's struggling with that number 2 position. And she's very tired. A lot of this information is coming through her mother, but her responses are that she's feeling flushed and her heart is beating very fast. The thoughts and images that are possibly going through her head, according to her mum, is that nothing she does is going to be good enough. And then a little bit later, we see Kendall herself saying that she doesn't want to do this anymore. She wants to stop. The last one that I'll talk about is the actor Hugh Jackman. And Hugh Jackman was interviewed on Charlie Pickering, The Weekly. And in this interview, Hugh Jackman talks about how, for him, the anxiety was completely unpredictable. Some days he'd be fine, some days he wouldn't. He reports more anxiety, it appears, around singing, but he couldn't determine any pattern to it. Although he doesn't talk much about the somatic responses he had when he was feeling anxious, he does talk about how it would just get stuck in his head. And that's how, when we often feel anxious about something, that's how it feels. So whatever we are thinking is just right in our head, and we can't change the way we're thinking, and we can't get rid of those thoughts. He talks about his feelings being, he was very scared and he was very nervous before he had to go on and perform. What he did was he worked with someone and he created these different personas. So he has Frank, who is his confident persona, and he has Charles, who is his nervous personality. And they are both important because, of course, Charles being nervous helps him to get the work done and helps him to say, have you done what you need to do? Are you doing enough to be able to perform how you need to? So this has been his way of balancing out the nerves with the confidence and being able to step onto the set. You can take a look at these videos that I've just talked about, and likewise you can spend an evening surfing on the internet, seeing what other information you can find. If you are a lover of autobiographies or you have particular dancers that you really like to follow, they may be writing some things in their blogs. There may be some chapters in books that talk about early stages in their careers where they're anxious, or in fact, if that anxiety remained with them for their whole life. Use the table to see if you can separate out and identify the different components that we're going to talk about in the anxiety. Then in the next section, you'll see a title, Your Own Practice. And it's at this point that I encourage you to take a moment to see if you can fill out one of these 6-item tables in relation to yourself. I suggest choosing an event that you remember can remember really clearly because it in some way activates you. It can be a small or a big thing, and in fact you might like to fill this table out a number of times thinking about different situations. So for example, you may have recently done a dance competition or a performance where you felt nerves, but likewise you might notice that you become activated in small ways. For example, in class. In class, if a teacher gives you a correction, does it activate you in a certain way? If they don't give you a correction, does it activate you? Do you become activated if you watch certain people in the room dancing as opposed to others? Do you become activated in certain classes but not in others? This is the beginning of the observation process for yourself. Can you notice a time when you have felt activated in your system? And is it possible for you to sit and reflect on these 6 points and see what kind of story you can begin to piece together about your own performance anxiety?